There are moments in life when the truth reveals itself with a force that leaves no room for denial, and mine arrived on a day that should have belonged entirely to my child. I am Marissa Hale, 35 years old, a financial consultant who returned to her parents' home after a difficult divorce, with the hope that familiar walls could offer a sense of stability while raising her 7-year-old son. I worked hard to rebuild our life, yet inside that house I carried an unspoken weight, shaped by years of subtle comparisons and quiet expectations. I accepted the imbalance because my focus remained on giving my son the kind of security I never felt growing up. I believed that if I stayed patient, the tension would eventually soften and the distance within the family would fade with time. That belief held until the afternoon, when everything I had ignored became impossible to overlook. During the preparation for his birthday, a shift occurred that I have replayed in my mind more times than I want to admit. My mother walked into the room, looked at the cake, as if it represented something she refused to tolerate, lifted it without hesitation, and threw it outside in front of our neighbors. Her voice cut through the stunned silence as she told us to celebrate somewhere else. My son froze before reaching for me with a fear that tightened every breath in my chest, and in that instant I realized a line had finally been crossed. This moment left a mark on both me and my son, and I would truly value the way you see it from wherever you are in the world. If you are willing, let me know your time zone and where you are watching from, because hearing voices from different corners helps me heal in ways I cannot explain. A few days before Trevor's birthday, an old pattern resurfaced with a clarity that forced me to confront the history I had tried for years to overlook. My earliest memories were shaped by the sense that I needed to work twice as hard for half the recognition, and as I grew older, the imbalance settled into the rhythm of our household. My mother reacted warmly to every small achievement my younger brother managed, while my father adopted a quiet stance that made it clear he supported whatever direction their attention leaned toward. I learned to keep my accomplishments to myself because expecting acknowledgement only led to disappointment. The divide became sharper after my divorce. When I returned home with Trevor, the atmosphere shifted in a way that exposed every assumption my parents held about my worth. I could feel the subtle judgment each time I came home late from a meeting or traveled for work, even though my job demanded constant availability. The unspoken belief in the house was that I had failed, and that by returning, I became a burden who occupied space only because they allowed it. I stayed because I needed stability for my son, yet the undercurrent of disapproval never softened, not even for a moment. As Elliot began pursuing a startup idea, the dynamic tilted even further. He spoke passionately about the project, yet the pressure to support him financially fell heavily on me rather than on either of my parents. He approached me repeatedly with requests disguised as opportunities, insisting that a contribution would accelerate his progress. Each conversation carried an edge that hinted at resentment when I hesitated to take on more than I already shouldered. My parents responded with concern whenever he mentioned the challenges he faced, while offering me only the expectation that I would fill the gaps he could not handle. The situation reached a point where the requests no longer sounded like suggestions. Elliot came into the living room one afternoon and placed his laptop in front of me, showing a model of the car he claimed he needed for upcoming business meetings. The way he framed the demand made it clear that he saw it as a responsibility I owed, as if my income existed to serve the vision he had for himself. When he explained that the car cost $30,000, he monitored my reaction with a confidence that suggested he believed I would accept without question. I told him calmly that I could not buy a luxury car for him, and the silence that followed cracked open a part of him I had tried to ignore. His face tightened before he stepped closer, raising his voice with accusations about how I refused to support the family even though I earned enough to help. He claimed that my success meant nothing if I would not contribute to the future he believed belonged to him. My mother entered at the height of the argument and immediately sided with him, insisting that I should step up because he had potential that justified every investment. Standing there listening to the two of them speak, as though my boundaries were an inconvenience, revealed how deeply the imbalance ran. Their certainty that I should comply came from years of believing my needs mattered less, and in that moment I realized how little had changed, despite all my effort to sustain peace in the house. The encounter stayed with me as Trevor's birthday approached, settling into my thoughts as a reminder of how fragile the calm inside our home truly was. One evening before the party, I felt a strange heaviness settle over the house as I tried to prepare the last details for Trevor's birthday. I had spent the entire week balancing client calls with the quiet hope that the small celebration would give him something to look forward to, yet every step seemed to spark new tension inside my parents' home. I could sense the unease from the moment I brought the decorations into the living room because the atmosphere shifted the instant Mom walked in and glanced at the supplies in my hands. I focused on sorting the gift bags, while Mom reminded me that Elliot disliked loud gatherings and preferred a calm environment. Her tone made it clear that whatever Trevor wanted ranked far below Elliot's comfort. She did not raise her voice, but the comment carried a familiar chill that tightened my chest. I asked whether a simple table for the kids would be acceptable, and she responded that it would be better to avoid anything that looked excessive, because in her words, we should respect what Elliot enjoyed. The implication followed me through the room, as if I had disturbed something that was never mine to control. While we arranged a few items, I overheard a couple of neighbors murmuring near the fence outside. They had always kept an eye on our household since I moved back with my son, and their glances often lingered on me as if returning home after my divorce had marked me as a permanent burden. I tried to ignore the whispers and focus on the checklist, though even that task grew harder each time Mom sighed at a ribbon or at the color of the paper plates. She asked whether I truly needed so many things when we were sharing a roof with my parents, a question that stung more than she intended. That evening, my friend Kendra arrived unexpectedly. She was the only friend who had stayed close during the most difficult changes in my life, and she sensed the strain on my face the moment she stepped through the door. I introduced her to the room as my closest support, and she immediately stepped beside me to help tie the last few strings to the banner. Her presence eased some of the pressure gathering around my shoulders, yet she also noticed how Mom avoided acknowledging her or commenting on anything she did. When I walked her to the porch after she finished helping, she squeezed my hand and reminded me that Trevor deserved his moment even if the house felt colder than usual. As the evening grew later, the tension between Mom and me deepened. She asked me whether I had considered postponing the celebration since Elliot had been working late that week. I reminded her that the party was for Trevor and that I had already confirmed everything with the families of the kids invited. She frowned at my answer and told me that I had become too sensitive about things that were not as serious as I believed. Her dismissal silenced me for a long moment because it sounded much like the comments she made after my marriage ended the ones that convinced me I should be grateful to live under her roof again. Trevor was coloring in the corner when he overheard her tone. I saw his shoulders loosen at first, then tense again, and when I turned toward him, he avoided my eyes. He asked quietly whether his birthday bothered everyone and whether the adults wished he had chosen something smaller. His question settled into my mind in a way that left me struggling to respond without breaking. I sat beside him, placed my hand on his back, and told him that his birthday mattered and that the plans were staying exactly as they were. He nodded, though the earlier brightness in his expression faded into something heavier. By the time I tucked him into bed, I realized that the tension of the evening had carved a deeper line between what I hoped for him and what this household continued to impose on us. The celebration was only a day away, yet the air already felt fragile enough to crack if anyone spoke too loudly. When the day of the party finally arrived, the house felt unusually crowded as relatives, neighbors, and a few co-workers stepped through the doorway with the kind of polite smiles that often hid their curiosity about how my family functioned. I tried to stay focused on Trevor's excitement, even though my stomach tightened with every new voice drifting through the halls. I reminded myself that this was supposed to be a celebration for my son, not another reminder of how out of place we were in my own parents' home. My brother Elliot was already in the living room, acting as if the event had been arranged to inconvenience him personally. He stood with a stiff expression and a dismissive tone that spread through the room faster than any greeting. The moment he saw me carrying the small gift bags Trevor and I had prepared, he sighed in a way that made people glance at me before looking away again. He had perfected that slow burn of condescension years ago and used it whenever he wanted to remind everyone that he believed he carried more value in the family. Mom arrived beside him and looked at the cake I had ordered for Trevor. She studied it with an expression so sharp that my chest felt tight before she even spoke. "This will take up far too much room inside," she said, with a tone that suggested I should already have known the rule. "Move it to the backyard so it will not interfere with Elliot's space while he hosts his friends later." I tried to keep my voice steady when I answered her because the older I got, the more I understood how quickly she could twist anything into disrespect. I told her that the cake belonged on the table where Trevor wanted to blow out his candles since it was his birthday, and not an event built around Elliot's preferences. Mom did not appreciate the suggestion. Her eyes hardened in a way I recognized from countless childhood moments when she convinced herself that firmness was discipline rather than favoritism. She reached for the cake with a sudden force that startled several guests. Before I could stop her, she lifted it from the stand and threw it toward the ground with a burst of anger that silenced the entire room. The sound of Trevor's breath catching behind me hit harder than the cake hitting the floor. He had been holding a small stack of handmade cards he wanted to give to his grandparents, and they shook in his hands as he tried to understand what had just happened. Someone near the doorway whispered, "I guess some people can't manage simple family events." Another voice followed with a quiet laugh, noting that I should have known better than to plan anything too big for this house. Their comments stung because they came layered with the same judgment I had lived under for years, yet it was different hearing it while Trevor stood beside me trying not to cry. Elliot smirked and told Mom that she had done the right thing, as if the party for my son had been a personal inconvenience that required immediate correction. Mom nodded in agreement before telling me that I should take Trevor outside until everyone settled. Her tone made it clear that she believed Trevor's presence had created the disruption rather than her own choice to escalate the moment. Trevor's eyes filled with tears as he clung to my arm. He asked me if he had done something wrong because he could not understand how a simple birthday wish had turned into an argument in front of people he barely knew. I wrapped my arms around him and felt his small shoulders tremble while the room behind us stayed painfully quiet. Guests avoided eye contact with me, yet somehow managed to glance long enough to remind me that they had been waiting for something dramatic to confirm whatever they already believed about my life. I guided Trevor toward the back door because keeping him in that room would have only deepened the hurt. As we stepped away, I felt a familiar blend of humiliation and resolve building inside me. I had endured years of dismissive behavior, but watching my son absorb that level of cruelty changed something I could not ignore. I did not know exactly what the next step would look like, yet I understood with absolute clarity that something in our lives would not remain the same after that day. Right after leaving the backyard, I carried my son toward the car, trying to keep my breathing steady even while Trevor's small hands clutched my shoulder with desperate confusion. My child had always been sensitive, yet nothing prepared me for the tremor in his voice when he finally lifted his head and looked at me with tearful disbelief. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, swallowed hard, and asked the question that pierced deeper than anything my parents had ever thrown at me. "Why did she treat me like that, Mom? What did I do wrong?" The raw ache in his tone made something inside me twist with a kind of pain that felt sharp and strangely awakening. I cupped his cheek and told him softly that he had done nothing wrong, yet the hollowness in his eyes showed how deeply the humiliation had sunk into him. Watching his young confidence fracture so visibly made the humiliation I had endured for years feel insignificant compared to this moment. Every memory of being dismissed by my parents flashed across my mind, yet none of them compared to seeing my son question his own worth because of my mother's cruelty. When we reached my room, Trevor sat on the edge of the bed with his shoulders hunched forward. His breaths were shallow, as if each inhale carried the weight of the birthday he never truly got to celebrate. I sat beside him and tried to hold his hand as calmly as I could despite the storm forming in my chest. It was the first time I felt something close to clarity, after years of quietly surviving inside a household that treated my usefulness as the only measure of my existence. While I comforted Trevor, my phone vibrated with yet another notification. It was the mortgage reminder I had set for myself years ago, back when I moved in and agreed to help keep the house afloat. Every utility insurance bill, car payment, and service plan was under my name. For years, I handled everything while my parents insisted they would reimburse me, even though that promise slowly faded into silence. I had carried them, and they had never once acknowledged the weight I held for them. The humiliation in the backyard lit a fuse I could no longer ignore. I checked the list of payments due that week and felt something shift inside me. There was no sudden fury, no chaotic impulse, only a steady, decisive certainty that the system they relied on had been built by me, and I was finally ready to take it back. I opened every banking app, disabled autopay, and cleared my scheduled transfers. Electricity, water, internet, insurance, the mortgage, the phone plan, even the maintenance contract for my father's car, each service slid into the red with a single decision made by the very person they had just shamed in front of neighbors. My heartbeat remained steady as I confirmed each cancellation, not from spite, but from a simple realization they did not value what I gave, so they would now experience life without it. An hour later, the consequences began to echo through the walls of the house. The first call came from the utility provider, then another from the bank, and another from the car financing department. From downstairs, I heard my mother's voice explode in shock as she argued with someone on the phone, demanding explanations she did not have the authority to give. A second later, the router stopped blinking and her frustration turned into frantic yelling that bounced harshly through the halls. My brother Elliot's reaction followed soon after. I heard him pacing, muttering sharp fragments of panic as notification after notification reached him. His startup had been draining every spare dollar he could find, and without stable internet or access to the house benefits I had always covered, his fragile system cracked almost instantly. The fear in his voice as he argued with a client revealed the truth he always tried to hide. He needed those services far more than he ever admitted. Sitting beside Trevor, I finally felt a steady sense of control settle over me, not from revenge born of anger, but from boundaries born of love for my child. 1 week later, the consequences of my decision began unfolding in ways no one in my family had expected. I had regained a sense of calm that felt foreign after years of living under pressure, yet the peace did not last long because new turmoil erupted from a place none of us had prepared for. News alerts started appearing on local forums about a malfunction in one of the devices produced by the company my brother Elliot had been running with misplaced confidence. I initially ignored it, believing it had nothing to do with me, until the reports intensified and revealed a serious accident involving a driver who had used one of their products. The situation escalated quickly when the story reached regional journalists and began circulating on social platforms. I read every headline with a detached clarity, understanding exactly how damaging technical failures could become for a startup already strained by impulsive management. I had warned Elliot during previous conversations about the need for quality control and sustainable budgeting, but he dismissed every suggestion as an attempt to undermine his ambitions. Now the flaw had led to a crash, severe enough to prompt legal inquiries, and people demanded accountability. I could already visualize Elliot scrambling to contain the fallout, although I felt no urge to involve myself in anything related to his company. My phone vibrated late in the afternoon. The name displayed on the screen made me pause. It was Mom. I answered with measured patience, prepared for whatever plea she would deliver. Her voice was trembling, and she immediately insisted that I speak to Elliot because the situation had spiraled beyond his control. She repeated that he was my brother and that I should not allow him to struggle alone, especially when I supposedly had the financial expertise to prevent the company from collapsing. I listened without interruption until she finished, then responded with a level tone that carried years of suppressed exhaustion. I told Mom that Elliot had ignored every warning I had given him, treated me with blatant disrespect, and relied on me only when he wanted access to money. I stated clearly that I would not rescue him from the consequences of choices he insisted on making without considering their impact. Mom refused to accept my response. She raised her voice and insisted that family responsibility should outweigh past disagreements. I reminded her that responsibility worked both ways and that she had never defended me the way she defended Elliot now. She fell silent for a moment, then shifted to another tactic by claiming that Dad was becoming affected because his name was attached to one of the loans Elliot used to fund production. That statement forced me to take a slow breath. My father, referred to as Dad, had always tried to avoid conflict between us, yet he allowed himself to be pulled into financial risks he barely understood. I realized his involvement might be deeper than I had assumed. Later that evening, I overheard neighbors discussing the scandal while passing by my driveway. Their tone carried a mixture of curiosity and judgment, hinting that the reputation Mom tried to protect so obsessively was now crumbling because of Elliot's carelessness. I felt no satisfaction hearing their whispers, only a steady confirmation that the family dynamic I had endured for so long was unsustainable. The imbalance of expectations had finally reached a point where the public could see the truth my parents refused to acknowledge. I did not contact Elliot. I did not reply to Mom's repeated messages. I spent the rest of the night focusing on Trevor and maintaining the stability he deserved. Watching him play quietly reminded me that my energy was better spent protecting what mattered rather than repairing situations created by people who never valued my support. Another week passed, and the consequences surrounding Elliot intensified until every remaining layer of protection my parents thought they had finally snapped. I had settled into a rhythm of calm with my son Trevor, yet the world outside our home churned with complications tied to the investigations that continued growing in scope. The agencies involved escalated their review of the product incident, and the preliminary findings were serious enough to trigger a formal legal inquiry. Subpoenas were issued to every individual whose name appeared on financial documents tied to Elliot's operations, which meant my father and mother were pulled directly into the center of the case. The news reached me through a former colleague who handled corporate compliance. She explained that my parents had been listed as financial guarantors for two major loans Elliot used during the earliest stages of his company. The investigators considered them relevant parties, and they were now required to appear in court to answer questions about the funding streams. I listened quietly, feeling a heavy ache that surprised me in its familiarity. For years, I watched them rush to protect Elliot from every setback, and now they were trapped in the very net they had helped weave. Soon after, rumors about impending foreclosure began circulating through the neighborhood. Several neighbors contacted me privately, and even though I never asked for details, they insisted on sharing what they overheard. My parents had fallen behind on their mortgage after years of using personal funds to stabilize Elliot's reckless spending. When the investigations froze his accounts, every payment they depended on was halted. I avoided judging them, yet I could not ignore the bitter truth that this outcome was built from years of willful blindness. The house was scheduled for a forced sale unless they found immediate funds, which was unlikely given the circumstances. News traveled quickly about Elliot as well. Regulatory pressure forced his company to suspend all activity until the investigation concluded. Employees were either furloughed or released entirely, and suppliers cut ties without waiting for explanations. My brother had always believed failure was impossible for him, and now he faced a reality he had mocked others for experiencing. I did not reach out. There was nothing left to repair between us. Late in the afternoon, while I prepared dinner for Trevor, the doorbell rang. I felt a quiet certainty about who stood outside, even before I checked. I walked to the entryway and looked through the small side window. My mother stood on the porch shoulders, hunched hands clasped tightly, eyes clouded with a desperation I had never seen from her. For several moments I remained still, my breath controlled, my resolve steady. The part of me shaped by years of dismissal wanted to open the door, yet the part I fought hard to rebuild knew that doing so would drag me back into a cycle that had consumed too much of my life. She knocked again, softer this time. Then she called my name, pleading for me to listen. I leaned against the wall, letting the weight of everything settle in my chest. I loved her, but love did not require returning to a place that had crushed me. I stepped back from the door with deliberate care and allowed silence to answer for me. After a long pause, her shadow shifted and she walked away. I returned to the kitchen where Trevor hummed while arranging his toys on the table. Peace felt fragile yet real, and I held on to it with everything I had. A few months after the fallout, the echo of everything that had shattered my family still lingered in local conversations and slow news cycles. I started noticing that updates about the investigation appeared regularly, each one revealing another turn in the legal consequences that had been building from the reckless decisions they had made. I felt a strange mixture of distance and clarity as I learned that the civil liabilities had reached their final stage. The court had determined that my brother Elliot, my mom, and my dad all bore direct responsibility for the damages tied to the faulty products and the financial misconduct surrounding the family loans. Their sentences were not dramatic in length, yet the weight of them changed the shape of their lives completely. My brother lost every asset he had once flaunted with careless pride. When I read the official notice confirming that his company had been dissolved, I was struck by a quiet sadness for the version of him who might have grown differently if he had ever learned to stand without leaning on our parents. Bankruptcy court filings filled the remainder of the story. I skimmed each one not with bitterness but with a sobering understanding that choices once repeated enough eventually ask for payment. My mom tried to reach me once more during that period. A letter slipped into my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, sealed with the familiar handwriting that used to label my school lunches. I held it for a moment before opening it and realized that my hands were steady. The envelope felt heavier than it was. Inside, she asked to see me, claiming she wanted to explain, to apologize, to reconnect. Yet her words carried that same subtle expectation that I would help soothe or shoulder burdens that were never mine to bear. I folded the pages carefully and dropped them into the kitchen trash without reading them again. My son Trevor healed at his own pace during those months. His emotional bruises softened with time and conversations that helped him reclaim the confidence he had lost in the chaos. I watched him rediscover small joys like drawing after school or building intricate towers with his old boxes of wooden blocks. When he laughed without hesitation for the first time in a long while, I felt something inside me settle. I finally moved us out of Pueblo and into a quiet rental near the foothills. The air felt open in a way I had not realized I needed. I arranged Trevor's room so it would greet him with warmth the second he walked in, choosing soft colors and a new desk where he could write or paint. Our routines grew simple and peaceful. I no longer checked my phone expecting sudden demands or crises. Even grocery shopping felt different when I was not calculating how to stretch myself between my own responsibilities and the constant drain of my family's expectations. We settled into a quieter life that belonged only to the two of us. Some evenings I sat on the back porch after Trevor went to bed and let the stillness wipe away the remnants of every argument and accusation my parents had thrown at me. I never drove back to Pueblo after the move. The distance between us was no longer emotional alone. It had become a geographical boundary that marked my decision to protect the life I was rebuilding. I no longer needed to justify my choices or plead for respect that was never given freely. Peace, once unfamiliar, became something I recognized when I opened my door each morning. Life taught me that boundaries are not punishments, but necessary forms of honesty toward ourselves. When favoritism becomes a pattern, when respect is withheld, and when responsibility is avoided, distance can become an act of self-preservation rather than cruelty. Healing grows in spaces where dignity is allowed to breathe. Walking away was not about winning or proving anything. It was about choosing peace without waiting for permission that was never going to come. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. I truly appreciate the time you spent listening to every step, every emotion, and every turning point. Your perspective matters, and I would love to hear how you interpreted the choices I made. Please feel free to share your thoughts, your experiences, or the lesson you took from this journey. Your voice adds depth to conversations like these.